Welcome back to the Blue Yonder Overland podcast. I'm so excited to have you join us today. We've got a very special interview lined up with guest Alex Hager, who is the 2022 U.S. Coffee and Good Spirits champion, and also will share about her background and lessons learned getting into camping, bike packing, solo overlanding, and talk about the mindset to get into all these activities as a solo adventurer, plus some practical tips and gear advice. Alex has also ironically found community from camping solo, and so she'll share about the benefits of both solo and group adventures she's been on. And I'll reference recording our interview up in the Black Hills of Sturgis, South Dakota. But of course, as adventures never go to plan, we are actually stuck in Denver, Colorado for a couple of days as we were passing back through for some of Matt's work business related to building CampWorks NS1 adventure trailers, and ran into some issues with our Toyota Tacoma, and so have that in the shop and are therefore not on our way to Big Bend National Park right now. So it's been a real lesson from the universe this week in just learning to roll with the punches and having to hold plans a little bit loosely, and not much you can do besides just try to have a sense of humor and try to do the best with the time you've got wherever you end up. I'm trying to be grateful that it looks like we will still be able to start off our grand adventures, meeting up with friends in Houston and Austin. So hopefully our adventures won't be delayed too much longer. On the subject of unanticipated hurdles, as I said last episode, I was going to really try to avoid politics. But then, of course, Friday, Valentine's Day here in the United States, the U.S. Forest Service and U.S. Park Service were on the chopping block for employees being laid off from the federal government. So 10% of the Forest Service. And obviously, that's going to have a huge direct impact on adventures like overlanding or using the trails, camping in any way. So if you are not up to speed on that, please go read some articles, call your senators, call your representatives, and advocate for national parks and National Forest Service staffing and funding levels to be restored, because that's going to impact all of us. And I know there's a million important issues you could be advocating for, and you might not think your voice will make a difference, but please don't give up hope. For all of you out there who might be dealing with some unexpected detours or just other roadblocks in your day-to-day life that you couldn't anticipate, I hope you feel encouraged listening to this podcast and are able to use it as a moment to reset and think about engaging with life adventurously, even though it brings such constant change. I think Alex does a really good job of explaining some of the mental freedom and just sense of wonder you get while outdoors. So I hope you'll find that encouraging. Today, I'm very excited to have with me the twin sister of my sometimes co-host and husband, Matthew Hager, his twin sister, Alex Hager. Welcome, Alex.
Nice to be on. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. Very excited to have you.
Even more excited to be where you are right now.
Yes. Well, we are actually in the Black Hills of Sturgis, South Dakota, getting our camper packed up to depart this week. And so this is also testing out the podcast setup in my new little sound booth here in the trailer.
So it looks great. It looks very comfortable.
Thank you. It's actually so warm in here because it's like about 5 degrees outside that we warmed it up, and now I'm like hot in here. Good problem to have. So Alex, there's a lot of different directions that we could take this today. For those of you listening, Alex was the resident coffee barista brewer at our campground wedding. At the time, she was practicing her Irish coffee recipe to represent the United States of America in the World of Coffee Championships in Milan, Italy in 2022, where she competed in the Coffee and Good Spirits category with some mind-blowing Irish coffees. She's also fluent in Korean and works for a Korean-owned bakery chain as their coffee research and development specialist. Has also gotten very into overlanding. So I think we're going to start with sort of the overlanding and how you got into the outdoors. You have a very cool Ford Bronco setup, which we'll circle back to. Anything else you'd want to add just by way of introduction?
Oh, no. I find other people are far better at introducing me than I am at introducing myself. I'm an avid cross-country ski evangelist. So I try to get everyone else around me into cross country skiing.
Love that.
That's probably the only addition. And that is added to the overlanding fun of trying to find ways to do winter.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so I know from the conversation that I had with Matt, just kind of hearing about what led him into the outdoors and background, that you guys didn't grow up camping or spending a ton of time outdoors. And the other funny thing is that everyone in the family has told me, and I think you and Matt have commented, is growing up, you and Matt were actually not very similar at all. But of course, now as I've gotten to know you guys in the last few years, I'm always amused at how similar you are. And you always end up researching the same outdoor equipment or getting into the same sports. So I'm really curious to hear your journey into the outdoors and if it was at all similar to Matt's. So walk me through from not growing up doing much outdoors. What were the turning points for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think like Matt said, we didn't really as a family do that kind of stuff on weekends. We were mostly a soccer family. So it was, every weekend you had your AYSO soccer matches. So I maybe we had one camping trip as a kid. And I always remember liking the outdoors and liking being outside. I got to do a horseback riding camp one summer with my aunt.
Ooh,
I loved animals. Yeah. Yeah.
that sounds so cool.
and I've always loved that part of it. So being out on animals, being out, just getting out onto trails. I think I really didn't get into doing outdoorsy stuff till after college, even. I think when I started living in Korea, I started going hiking with my Korean colleagues at the time.
Awesome.
And then it's actually really started more with, we did day hikes, but I'd never done any backpacking or overnight stuff. And then it was actually kind of Korean style bike packing that got me into more of that overnight style thing, and like, what can I fit on my bike and where can I go? And in that case, I sometimes stayed at hotels still, but it was more the adventure of it. And when I came back to the United States, I worked at Blue Bottle Coffee for a while. And as a barista, you don't really have, a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday schedule. So finding stuff to do with people on your weekend versus their weekends was always a challenge. And so I wanted to keep going out and doing stuff over the weekends and going out and using my weekends. And so that was what got me into backpacking initially.
Okay.
And that's the cheaper, I would say, of the overnight camping excursions to get into. You can do overlanding cheaply, but it very quickly snowballs into not being cheap.
Isn't that the truth? Yes.
Especially if you go even just once with Matt and you're like, okay, now I'm ruined forever for the roughing it experience. Right. But yeah, so then I did backpacking in Joshua Tree, and I would just go out on routes that I felt comfortable doing by myself. And there was a backpacking trip in Joshua Tree where I probably saw for 2 days, maybe 2 people.
Wow.
And like my campsite was just rocks and desert for miles with this kind of like a little bit of cloud cover. And you just sit there, with a cup of, at that time, I think it was instant coffee, just watching the clouds and looking over. And that kind of sensation that you get from being out in the middle of nowhere by yourself and just letting your brain eventually turn off and just zoning out it's something like I'm always constantly chasing, because it's hard even when you know what it feels like and technically how to do it to get your brain to fully go into that zone.
100%.
So
I'm also chuckling a bit at Joshua Tree playing a role for both of your adventures, even though they weren't together. Joshua Tree had a profound effect on both of you.
Yeah,
That's cool.
It's funny because I would never have guessed Matt and I would end up being as similar as we are, because we literally, growing up, it was the running joke that if you could name one thing on a spectrum, then we were on opposite ends of it. So to have become as similar as we are is even, I think, probably for us, kind of a laughing point.
For sure. So then tell me exactly when you first heard about overlanding or dispersed camping and what your first trip of that was like.
Yeah, so I can fully blame Matt for that one. We went out to I think he was doing a long road trip with a bunch of days of overlanding planned, and he'd come down through Bryce Canyon and then to Zion and he just invited me like, hey, you want to meet me at Zion? And so at that point I was just doing backpacking, which is fun, but it's definitely like, it's an effort. So sometimes you're like, I don't want to rough it this weekend, or I don't want to plan, okay, where am I going? What do I need to bring as much?
And some seasonal limitations, or at least it makes it a little harder.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, there's a lot of that actually. And so, yeah, I went out to Zion, and he, of course, even at that time had just a ludicrous setup with a beam projector and a little TV screen and his little porta potty. And I'm like, I didn't know all of these things existed for camping. And he just had this great like overview. And I mean, being a barista at the time, was I barista at that time? Yeah, I think it was still. Like budget is always a thing, and so it was like, oh, you mean, yes, okay, the camp toilet and the beam projector are maybe a little bit extra, but like not having to find a campground and pay for a campground was definitely appealing. At the time, and then little did I know that it would snowball on the financial side of things to a new car eventually.
Okay, so then you came back from that trip and you started getting into overlanding, and you're first in the Kia Soul, is that right?
No, even smaller than that. So the Nissan Juke. So
okay, the
little
Nissan
hamster
Juke.
car.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, people will laugh. What I always say, the car thought it could off road. It definitely went places it wasn't supposed to.
Love
it. In terms of like, there was one trip where I went and I was like, I'm not entirely sure I can go back the other way. So I really hope I don't run into anything I can't go over.
For sure.
And I got lucky enough that I didn't, but that was definitely like, okay, yeah, maybe one, this car, and two, knowing kind of, not getting to that point where you've already gone too far. Is like, okay, let's slow it down, let's back it up, let's make decisions a little bit earlier. I would just sleep in the back of that with a little mattress and have my little backpacking camp gear out. That I think that trip in particular was out near Yosemite. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
And you've gone back to Yosemite now many times,
yes.
Dispersed camping, correct?
Ironically, Yosemite is one of the ones I tend to, because I like to go in the winter, and the national forests around there can be really hard to access in the winter just because of snow. So it's one of the times I do tend to use campgrounds. And I will say the secret for national park campground camping is being flexible and finding last minute people who've decided they can't go that weekend. And be like, all right, this, it's Friday. Hey, guess what? I'm driving up to Yosemite this weekend. I found a campsite. And so I do a lot of that whenever there's snow, because Yosemite is my favorite place to go cross country skiing.
That sounds awesome. We're going to have to do that together with you at some point.
For sure.
Okay. So then from the humble beginnings, you then progressed into actually buying a car centered around the idea of overlanding. And so then how did you decide to go with the Ford Bronco?
Yeah. So, and to clarify, because the Bronco owners out there will make this distinction, it's the baby Bronco. So it's the Bronco Sport. It was one where like I have a 30-mile each way commute to work every day. So that's 300 miles just of commuting every week, which it adds up. So I, as much as I'd love to get a full size Bronco and have a car that I can really just use for fun, it's not really a practical commuter car. I also am someone who has always liked small cars and liked the ease of parking and the ease of maneuvering small cars. And I often find that it's quite helpful on trails to have small, narrow cars.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
And so it was one where the Juke was over 100,000 miles and definitely, heading towards some big expensive repairs. And it wasn't really a car that was meant to overland. And so I was now realizing kind of how I use my car. I was like, okay, I'm going to get a car that is going to work for me. And in this case, it was like, okay, it was right around the time the Bronco Sport came out. And I was like, okay, nice, compact, perfect for one person, fits everything in the back, has a cool little table shelf thing on it. It's got ground clearance. It's got, Ford tells you to go off-roading with it. So I was like, it may not be a full-sized, 4-low capable off-roader, but it definitely is more capable than people often give it credit for.
And I know then after you got it, you were invited to a Ford Bronco organized event, right?
Yeah.
Tell me
So
about
one of the
that.
coolest things that Ford does is for anyone who buys either a Bronco, full-size Bronco, or the Bronco Sport, they basically give you, I think you have a year, maybe a little bit longer than that, to go out to what they call off rodeo, they have several of them set up permanently all in a couple different locations in the US, including Moab, Tennessee, and then Texas, I think, and Vegas. And basically it's a 1 day off-roading course of sorts. Like let's show you what your car can do. Let's teach you the basics of off-roading and doing it responsibly and doing it safely. And so I've actually gotten to do that twice now, because I got to do it when I bought my car, and then I got to do it when I convinced my mom to buy the exact same car.
I love that.
So we did. I did it in Moab the first time, which was really cool, because it was one where I think, even being told on the marketing materials that this car can off-road, it's hard to convince yourself that it's supposed to off-road.
Well, especially if it's a brand new car, I'm sure it's a little hesitation.
Exactly. And so just taking out, and they let you take out theirs, so you don't have to run the risk of damaging yours. And getting to see, okay, it can go up and down some pretty steep, pretty rough stuff. And they walk you through, wheel placement, throttle and brake control, and it's quite a fun, and I think educational course for someone if you've never done overlanding or off-roading.
Cool. Do they also walk through, I don't know if there's any different modes with the car, or, different capabilities you can trigger?
Oh, yeah.
They walk through all of that too, specifically for the Bronco?
Yeah, they don't hit every single one of them, but they definitely so it has a sand rally kind of mode, and so they take you on a course where you can really open it up and actually go through some deeper sand, and it loosens up the steering, so you can take nice wide curving turns and really pick up speed. And they teach you that, and then they go through your rock mode and your mud and ruts modes, and kind of walk you through what those are actually doing when you put them in those modes. And then they give you specific obstacles to work on. And I actually thought it was really helpful. My mom found this helpful too, as they go over a little bit of also recovery. So if you do get stuck,
nice.
How can you, what do you need to have? What's the most basic things you need to have, which at the bare minimum is a shovel. Ideally traction boards can be helpful. But then if you have those, how do you use them, and how do you navigate obstacles and navigate getting yourself unstuck if you're stuck?
I love that you said shovel, because in our basics, me and Matt didn't cover that. And that's a pretty big oversight. Yeah. A shovel is a really useful piece of equipment.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a particular one that you really like or have
I've got two that are always in my car. One is more of your kind of military style folding compact, sort of more of a triangular shaped shovel. And then one is a snow avalanche shovel that kind of breaks down.
Nice.
So they're just always in my car, because I'm ready for the apocalypse in my car half the time. But even though I live in Southern California.
Right? You and Matt are actually very similar in that. I remember coming back from the first overlanding trip I took with Matt, I had the thought, if a zombie outbreak happens, I would like to be in this vehicle with Matt, because I think we could survive it. We have everything we need to live off grid for indefinitely, I think.
Oh yeah, for sure. Matt definitely does. Mine, I have to fit it in little nooks and crannies in my car. So there might be a few things we have to scavenge along the way, but we can at least stay warm and have a place to sleep and have some cooking utensils and a shovel.
Love it. I want to talk a little bit about the considerations for overlanding solo versus a group, because it sounds like from the very beginning of kind of getting into backpacking, you've never been afraid to strike out on your own. And I would love to delve into that mindset and sort of what it takes and sort of break down, especially mental barriers people might have to going out there on their own, especially as a female out in the wilderness. There's even sort of an extra layer, but I think a lot of the lessons apply to anyone going solo. So, how does it change trip planning and how you think about the trip and maybe risks along the way going solo versus with a group?
Yeah. It is funny because it's probably the thing that people ask me about the most, like, oh, aren't you scared to go by yourself? And there are moments where, every mouse sounds like a bear in the woods. Every little tuft of wind sounds like someone's opening your tent flap. I think part of it, part of the starting out on my own was just by necessity, not having, people with the same work schedules. But I'm also an ultimate introvert. I like to tell the story of one of my first dreams of what I want to do when I get older in elementary school was to be a hermit in a log cabin in the woods with full of books. So
I love that was your elementary school retirement dream.
Yeah,
love
that
it.
was my dream. I was just gonna live in a log cabin in the wood, filled with books and just read all the time.
That honestly sounds great. I'm on board.
Right?
Yeah,
it's more and more these days
cabin.
It's coming back. Exactly. But yeah, so it started kind of out of necessity, and then realizing that it wasn't so scary. Like a lot of those sound things, some of it is just planning. I think probably the biggest one is just having a really good idea of where you're going to go, how you're going to get there, particularly with backpacking, but even with overlanding, having routes kind of already scouted out and knowing as best as you can how difficult they are. I tend, particularly going by myself, because I don't have a winch on my car. It is capable, but it is not, a Jeep Wrangler or a full-size Bronco. And so I know that it has its limitations. So I'll look on things like, I know you've mentioned them before, but Onyx maps, or another one, Trails Overland, and they'll have trail ratings for, okay, this is an easy one. Anyone in a Prius can drive it, or this one requires a little bit of clearance, or has some off kilter sections or rutted sections. And kind of looking at those and what they're saying about them and what trail reports say about them to figure out, okay, is this a trail that I'm comfortable doing on my own? Or is it somewhere like maybe if I'm with you or Matt or with one of my overlanding groups that I've camped with, where they have winches and I know they can pull me out.
Nice.
Like, is that a trail I save for when I go with them? So I think that's probably like, setting your risk comfort level a little bit lower when you're traveling by yourself. Obviously letting people know where you're going. I'll usually have my parents both, probably the biggest piece of comfort of mind that I now have, and it took me a little while to get it, but when I started doing more backpacking, it was like, okay, I need to get this just for my own comfort, is having a Garmin InReach.
Yes.
And now iPhones have some satellite, and so I think there's other ways to get around that. But that was one where now I can text them my GPS with my campsite, or I can text them and say, hey, I'm heading back now. Or if I get stuck, I can now say, hey, I'm stuck.
Yeah.
So having that two-way communication tool is definitely like really nice when you're out by yourself. And I know it makes my mom
right.
happy to have
peace of mind
peace
for
of mind.
Everyone involved. Yeah,
exactly. And I would say, like, if there was one thing I would recommend investing in for someone who's looking to do it by themselves and maybe a little bit nervous about it, it would be something like that.
The two-way communication.
Yeah.
Yep.
And having that SOS button and knowing, Garmin's got great sort of systems around that, whether it's insurance for, if you do have to get rescued, or if you get stuck or hurt or whatever. But then also just knowing, like, okay, if something happens, I have this emergency communication line. I think is super helpful for anyone doing this, because you never know, like, as much as you plan, you never know what could happen. I've had some fun. Even not overlanding, but even Yosemite, I had one trip I did, again, camping by myself at the campground to do a cross-country ski weekend, but we got a huge snowstorm that ended up closing Yosemite the day after I left.
Wow.
But there's kind of an easier route into Yosemite, a flatter, easier route, and then one that goes up and over a pass. And sadly, the easier route washed out. So everyone who was in Yosemite to get out had to go up and over the pass in the middle of a whiteout blizzard.
Wow.
And so that was one where it was slow going. It probably took 3 hours to go maybe 10 miles.
Wow.
But it was one where, okay, like I know, one, if something really happens, I've got that communication device. And where even going in, expecting some snow, like I always had the plan of taking the easy route out.
Yeah.
And sometimes plans don't go the way you think they will. But I got very comfortable at driving very, very slowly through the snowstorm. My favorite part of that story is those times when you're driving on mountain roads and some people are much more comfortable going very fast, and some people are much more comfortable going slow. And I'm usually like, I'll go the speed I want to go, and I'll use a pull out, and you can pass me if you want to pass. Go whatever speed you want to go. And this was one of those, like, I'm going as slow as, so I know I can stop. I know I'm not going to slide off the side of this mountain. And I'll let anyone pass me if they want to pass. And so it was every car they'd pass, and then they didn't want to be in front, and so they'd pull over, and then someone else would pass, and they didn't want to be in front, and so they'd pull over. So at the end, I ended up just in front going, all right, y'all are following me. We're going my speed, but obviously no one wants to be in front right now. So
oh, that's hilarious. Wow. Good story of escaping Yosemite in the winter.
Yes, definitely snow and weather can be something to watch out for. And I know Matt has told this story too, but paying attention to wind reports can be helpful. Obviously, snow is one we always think of, but particularly when you're camping, nothing can make a camp trip go really uncomfortable very fast as some high winds.
Yes, that's very true. It's funny in talking about your experiences overlanding solo, but I also think you have more experience overlanding with larger groups than Matt and I do, because we'll often go with maybe one or two other friends or one or two other vehicles. But it sounds like you've also been able to find a community in sort of the Southern California area. So talk to me a little bit about that, like how you found that and what sort of group trips you've done.
Yeah, so that was another funny story. My parents always have the running joke that if there's a Korean within like a 5-mile radius, I'll find them. So I wanted to do sort of a fun weekend adventure, and so I decided to do a bike packing trip from Santa Barbara. Yeah, from Santa Barbara back down to my house. And so you can take the Metrolink up to Santa Barbara, and then just put everything in my bike, rode down. I reserved a campsite in Malibu, which was right about the halfway point. And so it was just me and my little bike and a little backpacking stove with some ramen in this campground in Malibu, which was packed. And this huge group comes up next to me, and they happen to be Korean. So, I'm listening in because I can. And one of them apparently was really into cycling, so she was fascinated by me and my little backpacking tent and bike and ramen dinner. And so she came over and wanted to talk, and so I introduced myself in Korean just so she knew that I spoke Korean, and we got to talking, and they invited me over to their group. And they kind of alternate between doing sort of big group camping things in campsites when they can get reservations, and doing overlanding stuff and just off-roading.
Awesome.
And so, yeah, it kind of went from there. And so then I've joined them a couple times on their various overlanding adventures. And I went up to Monachi Meadows up in the Sequoia National Forest with them, which was a fun one because it's definitely more towards the limit of what I'm comfortable doing in my car. And I was only comfortable doing it because I knew they had winches and big cars that could pull me out. And so that was one. It was like, okay, this is a chance to kind of do something that's a little harder. That there's no way I would do this on my own. But
that's really cool
to do it with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Getting to kind of expand your horizons within the comfort of the resources of that larger group. That's so cool. Do you have a favorite overlanding trip that sticks out in your mind, or a favorite place that you go back to?
Yeah. I mean, definitely favorite overlanding trip, and it wasn't pure overlanding, but summer of 2023, and I saw you guys during this too.
Yes.
But I did
This was
a
an epic
big,
trip.
yeah, it was 2 weeks, going from basically up the west coast, then over through the Cascades and up to Canada, and then back down through Glacier, Yellowstone, Grand Teton, and then through Salt Lake City
Wow.
and yeah, it was,
I
I think.
forgot just how many amazing like national park and forest areas you hit
Yeah,
up
so
on
I
that
hit,
trip.
because even that's really only hitting the ones that were on the way down. I hit Lassie
Right.
National Park, which is kind of like a secret, don't let the secret out, but a little secret, I call it like the mini Yosemite / Yellowstone, because it's got a little bit of each and no one knows about it. And then I hit Crater Lake and Olympic, and then the Cascades, and Banff and Kootenai. And yeah, it was an incredible trip. I think I stayed at your guys' place in Kingston. I stayed at my aunt and uncle's place in Spokane, and I stayed at my mom's place in Calgary. But other than that, it was all overlanding.
Wow.
In fact, there were 2 nights I had reserved, 3 nights I had reserved campsites. One of them, the campsite got canceled the day of, and so I ended up having to overland for
Oh,
that one.
fun.
One of them, Matt also gave me some alternatives, so I kind of had it as a backup if I couldn't
Nice.
find anywhere, because I didn't know what the timing was going to be like. But
Yeah.
Matt has great routes out in the Olympic Peninsula, and so found a good spot there. And then the only one I actually stayed in a campsite was in Mount Timpanogos, down just below Salt Lake City, which was a beautiful, beautiful
Okay.
campsite and a beautiful mountain.
Interesting. Well, and I like, you said not pure overlanding, but I think a lot of our trips tend to be the same way, kind of interspersed occasional stops with friends or campgrounds with overlanding. And in some ways, it just really makes it easier too, in terms of access to a shower facility.
Yeah.
If you don't have one or don't want to bring one or don't want to mess with it, there's a few things like that where it's not the worst thing in the world to shake up the overland routine every few days and just do something different.
Oh, for sure. And at that time, I didn't have a rooftop tent. So sleeping in the back of a Bronco Sport, as comfortable as it can be, is not quite as nice as sleeping in a bed. So interspersing
Yes.
2 weeks with a few nights in a bed is definitely nice on the back, especially when you're doing, on average, about 8 hours of driving a day.
Yes. Well, and I'm curious because was that July? It was sometime in summer.
Yeah, I think it was the end of July.
So did you,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of places where you're going, up in the Pacific Northwest and up into Canada, luckily it stays really nice and moderate, especially at night as the sun goes down. Those temperatures you still actually need blankets or a fire to feel warm.
Yeah.
But curious if you ever ran into a situation where you got hot camping in the Bronco or how you mitigated that.
The night times weren't so bad. I hit some pretty nasty rainstorms down through Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons. Usually I'll crack a window and let a little bit of a breeze through to keep cool. Usually, up until recently, the struggle was staying warm, and particularly since I like to do winter camping and go cross country skiing, it
Yes.
was figuring out the little tips and tricks and kind of cheats to stay warm, because people think that sleeping in your car is warm, and it is not warm.
So what are your biggest tips and tricks to stay warm if you're camping in a car?
I would say the number one is close up the car pretty early, trap in what heat you can. And then I really like to bring along Nalgene bottles and then boil water and put those in my sleeping bag. Because if your sleeping bag's warm, like you're golden.
Yes. Me and my sister used that exact Nalgene tip when we went backpacking last summer in August, where we honestly had not brought enough warm things because it was so hot in Denver.
In the daytime,
and even in the mountains, we're like, it'll be fine. But it got way colder. A rainstorm blew in. And so with that front of air, it got way colder. We got soaked. Luckily, we had full dry clothes to change into. But then I remembered the boiling water or getting it warm and then putting it in an Nalgene bottle from hearing about it from you and Matt. So we did that. And honestly, it saved us, like instantly improved our mood. And then we could also use it for refills on our tea to help keep us warm. It was a great hack.
Yeah. No, that's kind of the way I love it too, is because then you do have, I mean, if you get thirsty in the middle of the night, you have water right at your feet usually. Um, and then it keeps it warm initially. So if you do want to top off your tea, you can do that. And then even in the morning, you know that you have at least one source of not frozen water that you can get started with.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And
I've had yeah, go ahead.
What I love about that too is it's cheap. Like all you need is a Nalgene bottle and a way to boil water. Obviously, there's a lot more expensive solutions for keeping yourself warm, but that one's so nice and cheap too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I've honestly, like, I mean, I'll always pack just in like an emergency case, hand warmers and that kind of thing, the sort of chemical reaction ones.
Mm-hmm.
But I honestly find the Nalgene bottle almost more effective most of the time because you can kind of get it right up, near one of your nice warm arteries, up on your armpits or somewhere, and it warmed you right up. And yeah,
Awesome.
I like that you touched on getting rained on, because that was another one with Yosemite, learning just how crucial having properly waterproof gear is for winter camping. Because I definitely had a tarp that was meant more for sun than for rain, and I had a lot of clothes that were not fully waterproof, and I had one very wet, snowy Yosemite trip. It was like, okay, yeah, if I'm going to keep doing winter camping, finding a way to stay dry is going to be a big one. So like I have knee-high snow boots for those situations that I keep in my car for winter camping, so you can walk through some deep snow and make sure your feet are nice and dry and warm, because I went through like 3 pairs of shoes and probably 6 jackets on that one 2-night trip.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And that's the worst. If you end up wet and then it's also cold, it's just miserable. And it's really hard to recover from that. So, and maybe you've already touched on it. I'm curious what the biggest learning experience has been for you of all of your camping and overlanding experiences. What was the one where you're like, wow, I learned a really valuable lesson there?
That's a good one. I think probably that Yosemite trip is because I do like winter camping so much. That was really the turning point of like, okay, I really need to think about how I can do this so that I am warm and I am dry and I can enjoy it. Because I've had winter camping trips where it was windy and you're basically just sitting in your car the whole time. I've had winter camping trips where I've gotten absolutely soaked. I've had winter camping trips where it's been well below freezing and I've been fine. And it was, a lot of it was preparation, like, okay, making sure I have checked the wind report. If it's going to be windy, don't bother. Cause I mean, there was one, actually, the off rodeo in Moab. I was like, okay, I'm going to go from the off rodeo and then I'm going to camp up in the mountains in the snow afterwards. And I did, but the next morning it was gusting so hard that it was literally throwing snow at you like sand. And it was okay, everything back in the car as fast as possible. And then just get out, which was another good lesson, is particularly in cold and in snow, if you're going to camp, start high and make sure that your out route is going downhill. Because I almost got stuck.
Very good advice.
This is before I had a shovel and traction boards, which they had just talked about in the off rodeo trip, and so it was like, okay, it didn't seem like a hard route, but there was just enough ice to get up the little hill, and I was getting no traction. So in the end, I was using whatever I had to kind of get some dirt out and get that over the snow to get and the ice to get some traction to get up. But I was like, oh, cool. Did I just get myself stuck already? So yeah, particularly whenever I'm camping in snow, I always try to make sure that during the daytime I'm going uphill and my campsite is uphill. Cause then I know I can always get out. I can always go downhill. Even if it's icy and it's a very slow, cautious slide down, I can get out.
Awesome. Okay, so you've talked a little bit about the different pieces of gear that you've acquired after different learning experiences, but what's the one piece of gear you have to have with you on every trip now?
The Garmin InReach is definitely one.
Good advice.
Yeah. Other than that, I don't know that there's any one specific. I always layer. So clothing is probably the one that I pay the most attention to. So making sure I have a really nice warm base layer, a good mid, and then different options for staying warm as it gets colder at night. So puffy jackets, and then a rain jacket,
Yeah.
and then a comfortable camp chair is
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I do have one for overlanding in particular. This doesn't work for backpacking, but I have a portable propane fire pit, and
Yes.
it was one of those ones. The very first trip I did with Matt, he had one, and I was like, this is a game changer because one, it's instant fire. You don't have to worry about finding wood and getting a fire started. And then I'm an early to bed, early to rise kind of person, so staying awake while that fire burns out is usually a challenge for me. So being able to just turn the fire off is quite nice. And then particularly in Southern California, we have a lot of fire restrictions with forest fires. Yep. So having that propane fire pit, and I've gone with a fairly small one that just kind of fits nicely under the shelf in the back of my car, which is great for one or two people. And then if you have more people, I think some of the bigger, rounder ones can be nicer. But awesome. Definitely worth it always.
Okay. And then we haven't talked coffee or food, but if you have like a favorite go-to easy camp meal, you mentioned ramen earlier. I'm curious if that's it or if there's something else that's also another go-to for you.
It kind of depends what I'm in the mood for. Ramen is probably the one thing I always have some around the house. So if this is like a last minute, I haven't actually planned on doing anything. That's the one I can always grab is just some ramen and like some tuna and if I have green onions, some green onions. And I like to do what I call fancy mac and cheese or fancy ramen, where I add a bunch of like fresh vegetables or meat to it.
That is awesome. It really elevates the experience. So you don't feel like you're just, eating something out of a can or a package.
But I would also say like just sort of sausage and gnocchi is a really easy, really good one. It was one I discovered on that big 2-week West Coast road trip because I'd gotten some fresh gnocchi from the market when I visited my mom in Canada. And then driving down through Grand Tetons, everywhere you go is buffalo sausage with huckleberry. I was like, all right, well, why not? I'll try that. And I just sliced that up and threw it on. And the gnocchi has enough starch in it to create its own little sauce. So the sausage creates all the seasoning, and then you got that and some asparagus in there, and you're happy.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I think this is an appropriate place to sort of end our conversation. Is a deep. Well, maybe a shallow dive into coffee because we may have to come back for a whole other coffee episode. But you mentioned at the very beginning, instant coffee. I'm curious how your coffee setup has evolved as you've camped and as you found cool gear. I know we've gotten a lot of our coffee gear recommendations from you. So talk to me about that evolution and your current kind of go-to setup for coffee.
Yeah, it's funny because even just this past year, like instant coffee was always my backpacking coffee because it's light and dehydrated and all you need is water. But actually the past year as I was prepping to go to Peru, I was doing more backpacking. And if I had like one piece of coffee gear I always bring with me, it's a grinder, like a little hand grinder. And for me, it's like even if I'm too lazy to weigh out my coffee and do all of the professional coffee things I need to do to make it super delicious, I will always grind it fresh. I might very, just kind of.
That's where you draw the line, though.
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
Grinding fresh coffee is like the point of no return. You have to at least do that.
And part of it for me is it's a very meditative action in the morning. And like I said, I'm much more of a morning person. So as the sun's coming up, just sitting there, you might have cold hands if it's the VSL grinder we both have because it's metal. But just sitting there and listening to the sound of the grinding coffee, the sound of the birds, the sound in the morning when no one else is awake is very, very meditative. And for that chance to kind of get that empty mind moment. And then after that, it really depends on the trip and how many people there are as to how full professional barista I turn into, whether I bring a scale with me and, have a little pour over and a gooseneck kettle, or whether I'm just, kind of dumping stuff from a jet boil onto some sort of dripper.
Okay. What advice would you give for folks, and maybe it's just to have a little hand grinder, but what the single biggest thing somebody could do to have better camp coffee?
That is most definitely it. Like having fresh ground coffee is, even if you're not like paying super attention to the ratios of, coffee to water, making sure you have hot water is probably a good one. But fresh ground coffee is going to give you so much more of the aroma and the texture and all the things that you're going to look for from a good cup of coffee. And even if you're not like a coffee connoisseur, like you'll be able to tell the difference between, fresh ground or something that you ground, before you headed out on the camping trip. I think I have a video on my Instagram of me hand grinding and jet boiling up out in the mountains down here in the San Gabriel Wilderness, which was a challenge because it was not an easy hiking trip, and it was heavy gear. But I was like, no, I'm gonna do my full pour over. Well, mostly full pour over, at least the grinding part set up.
Nice. Any other pieces of equipment that you've been particularly impressed with for coffee that you'd want to call out?
Yeah. So again, it depends really on one, what your setup is. I really like any kind of kettle that gives me control over pouring like nice and slowly and controlling that flow rate. And so I have the packed PA KT, I think it is. Which is really meant
Yes.
for hotel coffee, which I use it a lot for that too. But it's a little electric water kettle with, it's very compact, but it does have a gooseneck spout that fits up against it. So you're able to kind of control that flow rate. And that, again, it's kind of the meditative coffee person in me that, after filling, just kind of slowly pouring the water over the coffee is a nice one. And it's so hard to find compact kettles that easily fit into things that can do that. And even if you boil your water in something else, I'll sometimes still bring it and boil a bunch of water in a big kettle and then pour it into there to
Interesting.
pour over.
Okay. And so for someone who knows less about coffee, what big difference does it make being able to control the flow rate? Can you talk about what that does?
So much of when you're brewing coffee, so much of it is controlling the amount of time the water's in contact with the coffee, because that's going to control how much of those things in the coffee you pull out. And so being able to control that flow rate and making sure you're hitting all of the coffee evenly, and that you're hitting it so that the water's kind of going down at a fairly consistent rate versus doing the kind of dump and wait and dump and wait that a traditional kettle requires.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Super interesting. Any sort of last words that you want to share about why you love overlanding, or why folks should go, even if they have to go solo, like why it's so awesome to go solo overlanding in particular?
I mean, I love to say, like, particularly with solo. So I kind of jumped over this, but when you're doing solo, like when you're camping in general, as long as you pay attention to your food waste and your food and things that smell, wild animals are rarely looking for you. So many people are afraid of that piece of going by themselves and like, oh, what if a bear comes? What if, as long as you don't leave your food out and you don't, eat where you're going to sleep. Generally speaking, I've yet to, knock on wood, run into any major bear scares. If anything, campgrounds tend to be a little scarier to me because other people aren't paying attention to their food. But I would say, like, one, just getting out and doing it, particularly getting out and trying it by yourself. Because I think everyone's different. So some people really struggle to be by themselves and let their brain just run. I think there's some really cool moments you can have if you can get, that solo experience of truly just feeling like, oh, there's nothing around me. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. But it is where the word awesome really is applicable. It's just an awe-inspiring, awesome kind of experience to have. And then other than that, try and follow Leave No Trace, please.
Yes.
For anyone interested in it, if you can research one thing at all, it's Leave No Trace. Leave it better than you found it. Because there's nothing worse than going and finding a really cool campsite and having it just be littered with other people's trash. And if you don't clean it up, no one else is going to, or someone will, but they're going to be really upset that they have to do it, and you've ruined their experience. So,
yeah, really good point. Well, and I like what you said about it just being such an awesome experience on your own, just that sort of sense of wonder. I would imagine it's also very empowering, though. Like it's got to feel sort of emboldening. And I'm curious
Yeah.
if that has carried over like to other parts of your life. You know, is it like you can kind of carry that experience with you, confidence building wise, into the rest of your life?
I think for sure, I think any kind of, whether it's backpacking or overlanding, anywhere where you're doing something that takes you out of your comfort zone,
Yeah.
has that moment of, hey, I did it. And sometimes, sometimes it's a small win, and sometimes it's like, oh my God, I just, hiked a mountain, or oh my God, I just rode across South Korea, whatever it is. That moment of satisfaction, like, hey, even if it was hard, even if it was scary, I still did it. And that's something that I, as a person, am always looking for those moments. And so even if something scares me, and a lot of things scare me, I'm actually quite a scaredy cat. As people who know me more will know, I'm terrified of spiders. I'm terrified of insects in general, heights. But I'll go rock climbing. I'll go take a picture of a spider just to kind of get over that.
That's awesome.
that knowing that that's a fear I have, to kind of challenge myself to get past it.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I kind of have a similar, or I've developed a similar reaction where if I'm a little bit scared of something, but also intrigued by it, that's a pretty good sign I should probably go do it.
For sure. Yeah. That was, I mean, even with coffee competitions, it was one where I probably would never have jumped into that world on my own, and a little bit of pushing from behind, and saying, hey, what about this is making me scared, and what if I just give it a try? Like, what's the worst that can happen? In my case, it was not meeting a certain KPI, but ultimately it ended up being when I have stage fright, and I was able to completely get over that stage fright and learn that, hey, I can give a 10-minute presentation while talking and doing something really complex, and memorize it to the level where I don't have to think about it, and give it to the level where people, for the most part, don't see how nervous I actually am.
Yeah. And do it on a world stage. Like, we got to see you do this in Milan, Italy. It was the coolest experience.
It was cool to do. It was cool to do. I mean, definitely, it's one of those ones you truly don't know what you're capable of until you're put into that situation where you have to do it.
Yeah.
And then when you're in that situation, just giving it your best, so that you got no regrets. You couldn't do it any better. My kettle could have worked, but that wasn't my fault. So I did everything I could do perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, that's like a full circle right back to overlanding of, putting yourself in those situations where you are tested, and always appreciating the outcome, like knowing that you challenged yourself and proved to yourself you could do it.
And I think, like, I love what you talked about sort of that mindset of discovery, because it's one that I struggle with when I'm overlanding, because sometimes I just want to know exactly where I'm going to camp and exactly how to get there.
Yes, I struggle with this too. Yes.
So having that mindset, and it's sort of same with having that mindset about challenges. I think overlanding is a great way to push yourself, one, to do something that's a little bit scary and a little bit challenging, and set your boundaries so that okay, it's a little bit scary, but it's not dangerous. It's a little bit challenging, but I'm going to come out the other side. But also opening yourself up to discovery, to thinking about it in such a way that, like, hey, I know this scares me, but what could happen? What might happen if I let myself run with it, and think about going somewhere that I don't know. So yeah, awesome. I think solo is just playing in those batteries, so like figuring out, okay, how much am I comfortable being in that discovery mode when I'm by myself, and how much do I want to have it kind of laid out as much as I can, so that everyone knows where I am.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to leave the conversation. So thank you so much, Alex, for joining. Really appreciate this, and excited to dive deeper into some of these topics on a future episode. Thanks for joining us today. I'll put full show notes and links to any gear that we discussed over on blueyonder-adventures.com, along with maybe some behind-the-scenes video footage since we did have to record this remotely. That'll also be up as a short on our YouTube channel, Blue Yonder Adventures, since all of our podcasts are now published to YouTube Music, so it de facto created a channel. Just an FYI, you probably aren't going to find a whole lot of extra video content there unless we're doing some demonstrations, which we actually hope to do later in March. We'll do some cooking and basic prep. And as always, you can submit any follow-up questions or comments at Blue Yonder Adventures on Instagram or Blue Yonder Gen on Threads or Instagram. And we'll be back next Thursday with our next episode on dirty secrets of overlanding. How do you actually deal with things like bathrooms, showers, trash, keeping anything clean? If you've got questions you've been afraid to ask about overlanding or camping, send them to us as a direct message on Instagram or Threads, or reply to one of our prompts. I'll also be cross-posting and linking to Alex's socials if you want to see what she's up to on her camping and coffee adventures. Thanks for joining. See you next week.